Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I am delighted to be joined once again by the ACSOM team, Declan McConville JP Mason. Welcome back. We're another week into the silence and 75 days away from our first Champions League qualifier for next season. JP, also, interestingly enough, you also reminded us that was the year that we lost the 10 first time round, so cheers for that.
Before our time, before any of our time. So, you know.
I know, and it's not often I can say that these days. But yeah, we're still getting a huge amount of silence coming out of Celtic Park. There's a few talking points today. That's one of the things I want to talk about, the fan disengagement. I don't always like to use Chelsea as an example, but we'll look at what Chelsea are doing to get their fans involved in the process at the club by inviting them into the board meetings, which is quite a groundbreaking move by Chelsea. Obviously, the Spirit of Shankly at Liverpool are in discussions with their club around fan representation on the board. Yeah, at Celtic, everything remains quiet. So, I mean, it's indicative of where we are at the club at the moment. We'll also be speaking about the announcement last night around the Celtic Colts being included in the pyramid system. This is something that was floated by Jock Stein back in 1968. Some people said he was a forward-thinking manager, but that has taken it to new degrees. He made an application in 1968 to get the Celtic B team, the Quality Street gang as it was at the time, into the second division in Scotland. And there's a few other things to discuss. There was an interesting freedom of information request, Declan McConville, all around the Dubai trip that just won't go away. Have a wee chat about that. Player of the Year, first time in a decade a Celtic player has not been nominated. Once again, it really just is indicative of how bad the season's been. And let's have a wee look at some of the targets and some of the names that are being linked to Celtic, because there was an interesting discussion in the ACSOM WhatsApp group that can get a bit hairy at times in there, but there was an interesting discussion about the transfer policy and where we're going to go from here. So we'll have a wee chat about that and looking close up to home. But first and foremost, JP, what's your feeling now, all this time later with absolutely no real movement to speak of in relation to the managerial situation and the engagement with supporters?
It's kind of weird. I've got like I think I said this before, I've kind of like one thought about it on one hand and one thought about it on another in terms of the silence and the supposed so-called disengagement. And I just before I came on air, I read a certain journalist for a certain paper's article about this whole thing. I'm not going to mention who it is. But he was basically implying that, they must be sitting on something. How could they not be sitting on something? There's absolutely no way that there would just be this level and length of silence if there wasn't something, if they didn't have a couple of rabbits out of a hat. And he actually said, a new manager, a new captain, who's to say that, we wouldn't announce a new signing as a new captain at the exact same time as a new head coach or manager, which is something I hadn't previously thought about, but that's a possibility as well, because I actually think that we need to sign someone to be a new captain. I don't think there's anybody there that is standing head and shoulders above everyone else to be captain material.
It's a discussion that's been aired on ACSOM a few times over the last few weeks, so we'll pick up on that just now, JP. The Celtic captaincy, Declan, obviously we're going to be saying farewell very soon to Scott Brown, who there was the discussion just yesterday or the day before yesterday around the fact that he can't be referred to as a legend according to Charlie Nicholas. And interestingly enough, some of the commenters that day agreed that he's not a legend. That personally, it's difficult to define what's a legend, what's a great, what even is a cult icon, Declan. But Scott Brown, I think, in my mind, is a club legend. He's a modern day legend. Maybe in time people will appreciate it more, as often happens with football. But I agree with JP, and I think I've said in the past that I don't think Callum McGregor, although he has been touted as a natural successor for the armband, I don't think he's a captain. He's come off probably the worst season that he's had in a Celtic jersey. And I don't think that giving him the added, responsibility of being the captain, when the pressure next season is going to be massive with the rebuild and winning back the league title, new manager, new regime, new structure, I don't think that would be a good idea. I don't think he's a natural captain, Declan. And I've pitched the case for Chris Ayer, but I doubt very much that Chris Ayer will be at the club. And I know a lot of Celtic supporters have huge concerns about his ability as a centre-half. The nuts and bolts of defending, for example, Declan, which we've not done well enough this season. Obviously, he's partly to blame for that. So what's your thoughts on a captain? Have we ever signed somebody and instilled him as a captain straight away? I don't think so. No,
I don't think so. And Scott Brown, to me, is a Celtic legend. I think for anybody that's round about my age, he's always been in the team, so it is going to be very strange to watch Celtic without Scott Brown. Probably before last week, I would have said Callum McGregor was the man to be Celtic captain, but his naivety in the big game last week, I think we were all let down. Yes, Walsh, looking back on the actual ruling, shouldn't have did it, because I never knew that the ruling is if you do play advantage that then allowed to go back and book the player. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Callum McGregor's probably going to be the guy that would dig out a hole and rally the troops if you're down. And I think the way his game is, people would kind of describe him as a very tippy-tappy type of player. He likes to get the ball on the ground and move it about. He's not one that will put his foot in and whatnot. So it probably is at the point now where we are looking to maybe sign a replacement captain. But Callum McGregor, I would like him to be part of the squad, but I now don't think he's going to be the right guy to be the captain. He's going to be important for the rebuild, but I just don't think he's maybe got the right attributes to be Celtic captain.
I'm going to come to you on this one, JP, because it's something I've felt for some time around the captaincy that was given to Paul McStay. Now, before anybody gets ravenous about the fact that I'm using Paul McStay as an example, I'm not comparing him to Callum McGregor, and I'm not going to compare him to David Turnbull either. But I think that obviously the timing of that was that we were going through a huge upheaval at Celtic at the time that he was given the captaincy. We'd lost some massively influential players in Tommy Burns and Roy Aitken, who were born captains of Celtic, if you ask me. And then, we had a lot of new players coming in, a few youngsters coming in, new management team, and Paul McStay was given the captaincy. And I remember reading actually in one of Billy McNeill's autobiographies that there was a sense of regret looking back, that it may have been too much on the shoulders of Paul McStay, who should have just been left to develop and perform as the player we knew he was. So on the one hand, you've got the very, very poor Celtic team he was playing in the kind of early 90s, and the extra burden of the captaincy. And obviously, I don't think we've seen the best of him because of these reasons. The very peak of his powers for me was the centenary season, JP. So I think there is always, for me, a sense of caution when giving a captaincy to a player. There are some players who can take it at will, at ease, and run with it. And I just think, you know what, if we want to see the best of McGregor next season, if we want to see him getting back to his best, giving him the captaincy would be a bad idea. What's your thoughts on my words on Paul McStay and the captaincy? Do you think that affected his play back in the early 90s, as well as everything else that was going on?
I was going to say, as well as everything else, God. I mean, the fact that we were operating a biscuit tin mentality when it came to signings to help him out as a captain and all that. I think with McGregor is definitely about standards, and I think McGregor has probably learned a lot from Brendan Rodgers in his time, and you never hear any patter about McGregor. He's not on social media. You never hear about him, being up to anything out and about Glasgow or anything like that. And I like that about him. And I certainly think in terms of a role model as a football player, 100% Callum McGregor is one to look up to. But I think, I don't know if he's got that kind of angry bite side of it that Scott Brown has had in his time as captain. And I think it's all about a balance when you're appointing a captain. And that's why I say, I don't think there's anybody that stands out, because I don't think Ayer will be there after the summer, from everything that the people have said and certainly noises that have been made before today. So, I would it's opened that article has opened my mind to thinking of, what would happen if that did happen, if someone just came straight in and was made captain. I don't think you can say it's going to upset the dressing room, because the dressing room isn't together anyway. I mean, from what I can see. So.
No. I mean, with regards to Ayer, again, I've been a big supporter of Chris Ayer, a big champion of him. But again, you've just got to look at how poor we've been defensively, and he's part of that. So he's got to take the responsibility for it. But I'm like yourself, JP, I don't expect him to still be at the club, which frightens me, because I've already read out the potential defence that we'll have unless we really strengthen in that respect. But Callum McGregor, Declan, we've heard quite a lot of comments coming in saying that he gets a bit of a free ride on a Celtic State of Mind. We never criticise him for bad performances. And I guess it's try to strike a balance between what happens often with James Forrest and the amount of criticism he was getting prior to his injury, but actually looking at the reasons behind it as well. And I think that McGregor, for me, has been carrying a couple of players during every game, and he's probably played too much football. And then when we decide to rest him, we rest him in the wrong game, in the cup game against Ross County. So yeah, I take it. And I just said there, I think it's the worst season he's had in a Celtic jersey, but I'm not writing him off. And he's one player that I don't want to leave in the pre-season. I'm almost resigned to Ayer going. I think Edouard's going, and I would expect Christie to go as well. But I don't want Callum McGregor, because although I don't think he's a captain, I do think he's influential. Like what JP says, he's kind of like a role model. I know there was a small blip in his kind of copybook. There was an incident in Glasgow, but that was a few years ago, and he's certainly not a boy about town who gets himself into scrapes and all that. So I want to see him stay, and it's important to keep players like McGregor, because there needs to be some kind of succession. It can't just be a new team that we put out next season.
Yeah, there needs to be a continuity in there, and I think Callum McGregor, I think we've came to expect so much from him in terms of performance. He'd always be a kind of solid 7 or 8 out of 10 in majority of games. I thought last season he was very good. He scored that really good goal at Fir Park and whatnot. But this season he's been below par. He did have a bit of bottle about him, if you remember the Lille game at Celtic Park. Probably our best performance of the season. He makes a mistake and he goes up the park and he scores the penalty. So it showed a bit of character and a bit of bottle, which he's definitely getting his game. And I think under the right manager, in terms of what you touched on earlier, JP, in terms of, Rodgers' attention to detail with players is something I think Callum McGregor probably likes. And I think under a new management system would probably thrive. So I think it's important that we keep Callum in the team. He's a good bit of continuity in the team. He's an experienced head. He gets what Celtic's all about. But in terms of captaincy, I'm unsure.
Now, the main headline, if there is such a thing on a Celtic State of Mind, is all around fan engagement, JP. Why Dominic McKay should allow supporter presence at the board meetings. Now, I'm going to bring up a few different views on this one. So first of all, Liam Reid, who's watching on YouTube, thanks for joining us, Liam. If anyone else is out there watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because big plans for ACSOM and all the other channels that the contributors are creating. Young Declan there is the presenter of The State of Politics, which is getting some very, very good views. You went live the other day, Declan. It was a good watch. Liam says, I'm really disappointed in Dominic McKay. We were told that he is great at engaging with fans. Since he has come in, I have seen nothing to suggest that's the case. Now, we've got probably the counter to that, which is Gwyn's Beard, who says he isn't fully in a job yet, though. He didn't just start early. He's under PL's wing at the moment. Peter is still in a job. So yeah, absolutely, he's not yet in position, but he's at the club. And I remember in the week that Dominic arrived early, we asked the question, when's he going to address the Celtic fans? And some of the comments we got was, let him get in the door. What's the point in coming in? He's got nothing to say. Well, it would have just basically been a holding address, wouldn't it? It would basically say that I'm here. We know it's been a really, really poor season, and this is what we hope to do to re-engage with you and improve matters. Would you expect, JP, we're now 2.5 weeks down the line, would you have expected anything from Dominic McKay, or are you of the view that, he's not in position yet? Kevin Graham reckons he's trying to find out where the biscuit stash is and all this kind of stuff. But there is that induction period, isn't it? The handover from Peter Lawwell, 18 years worth of handover onto Dominic McKay. So where are you on this?
I just immediately heard Kev's on almost an imitable accent there, saying those exact words. Where am I on the Dominic? I haven't expected him to come out and say anything, because it just wouldn't feel right for him to come out as a guy who's basically shadowing on a job to come out and address, what is quite a sizable amount of people, really, if you think about it. I mean, sometimes I forget how many people, maybe tune into this. It just feels like I'm just sitting talking to you two, and then you're like, oh, actually a few thousand people are watching this. So for him to come out and address the Celtic, fan base, it's quite a big moment for him, going forward. So I don't think it's right that he necessarily does that while Peter Law was still in charge. I would have expected maybe to hear something. And I know that John Paul, the SLO, had indicated in a tweet that they expected something from Celtic within the last couple of days. They thought there was going to be some sort of general address to the fans, and that's not been forthcoming. So I would have thought that would have happened already. But with regards to the question about supporter presence in the board meeting, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you don't want to send a maniac in there, but somebody that's balanced and, maybe is already known between, amongst the support or whatever, but just to have a voice, it would be great, and also you get an honest reveal about what actually goes on. I mean, if they would be allowed to reveal that to us as fans.
These are the things, JP. Obviously, I met you through a Celtic State of Mind, and Declan, mainly, we know each other through a Celtic State of Mind, so you get to know a lot of different people, and it's brilliant. But one of the persons that came in was Tom Grant. And you remember Tom, JP, from being part of the old board. Obviously, he inherited his father's shares, and his father had inherited it from his cousin. Or auntie. So he basically inherited all these shares at Celtic and ended up as a board member, and he was a fan, and he still is a fan, and he's a season ticket holder, and he still goes with his mates, obviously under normal circumstances he would anyway. And one of the insights that he gave us that day, as well as things, and by the way, this was quite an early ACSOM podcast that we did, so check it out, because it'll be on YouTube and Spreaker and iTunes and stuff. But there was a few really, really good insights into the workings of Celtic around about that time. One of them, in actual fact, was around the Mo Johnston deal. So if you can bear to listen about that, go back and give that a wee quick listen, because he talks about dodgy payments, under the table payments, basically bungs, and Celtic were offered, if you pay X amount under the table and it's not on the books, you'll get the player. And apparently somebody else was willing to pay that, but Celtic weren't at the time, and that's why the deal eventually fell through. So Tom Grant was talking about this, but he was talking about the board meeting. So when his father passed away, his first job was he basically minuted all the meetings, JP. All the boardroom meetings, all the board meetings, he'd on the minutes. And he kept all the notes, and he still got them. So if you look at, I think he came in round about the time of Davy Hay coming in as the manager. So what am I looking at, 83, 84 kind of time. And he was there right up, actually, he was still at the club as a stadium manager when Fergus came in. So he was at the club for a long time. So I would love to have a wee look through the boardroom meetings, and the different things that were discussed. It would be an incredible insight. But the reason I'm bringing it up in relation to the supporter presence, there's been quite a lot of talk around fan representation. And obviously there's the Celtic Shared innovation that we've spoken about, and we've chaired a couple of the Q&As on a Celtic State of Mind, and it's an interesting way to actually attack it or tackle the issue. But I'm looking at the situation down south, Chelsea. I'm going to use them as an example because it's actually a very good example. And as of the 1st of July, Chelsea have announced that there will be supporter presence at the board meetings. Now, as JP says, Declan, right, even when we did our first dial-in show, and it was a trial show yesterday with Amy and Colin, people said it was very contrived because there was a few of the wider contributors dialing in. That was because we were just basically checking the system, making sure it would work. But we did have one absolutely brand new contributor of, I would maybe say, a dozen people that got in touch with us who hopefully will all appear at some time. But the process of getting someone on, and as JP says, and they're not a maniac, it's quite a difficult situation. So obviously everything has to be vetted and all that kind of thing. And I'm guessing that if there was representation at these meetings or indeed on the board eventually, it would need to be something that was on a nomination kind of process. It's not as though somebody could self-nominate, or a group or a firm or an association could self-nominate. The fans would have to have a say in that, of course. But what's your thoughts on it, Declan? Moving into a whole new era of football post-COVID, is this the way forward for a club like Celtic?
I think one of the things I want to touch on first, Paul, is Bayern Munich's club president, what he said yesterday about season tickets. Now, this is a kind of wee drift away, but I thought it was really interesting to hear what he said. He said, this is verbatim, we could charge more than £104. Let's say we charged £300, we'd get 2 million more in income. But what's 2 million to us? In a transfer discussion, you argue about that sum for 5 minutes. But the difference between £104 and £300 is huge for the fan. We do not think the fans are like cows who you milk. Football has got to be for everybody. That's the biggest difference between us and England. Now, German football is, of course, very different to British football. I understand that. Bayern Munich's a very different football club to Celtic. But there was a very good piece of communication between Bayern Munich's president and their supporters. Now, I know Dominic McKay is not fully in his role at this point in time, but something doesn't even need to be from Dominic McKay, Peter Lawwell, Ian Bankier, somebody. But I think what's been the issue for fans, not just this season or years previous, is that lack of communication. The only time it happens is at the AGM. You get a section, I've been to 2, people can ask questions, you get a couple of minutes, somebody will answer it, and then that's it. And it's not, you don't get the time, because these things, they want their cup of tea and they're off, and that's it. So I think if a club like Chelsea can do it, Celtic can do it. Again, would it be official bodies that represent fans, whether that be the affiliation, the association? We've got the trust to represent a lot of fans. I don't have a problem with it, because at the end of the day, fans should have as big a say in the running of their football club as the people on the board are there. And we're the people that are paying for season tickets. I get that you need smart businessmen to be there. All these guys that are on our board should be able to do their job properly. At points this season, that has been questionable. But I wouldn't have an issue with any fan getting in there and, being able to put their hat into the ring. Whether they're listened to or not is a different story. But I think you would certainly ease the tension that's been created this season by allowing that to happen, because you would have some form of communication, and that's something Celtic really, really need to work on, which I think Dominic McKay will work on. He's got a degree in media and communications. So, I think that's the one thing we need to work on. And it's not, we're not expecting big hoo-has and whatever, but just talk to us. I've said that continually on this podcast. If things don't happen, they don't happen. But if you tried, then okay.
See, the big thing for me, I'm going to name drop Tony Haggerty, who is a very trusted and valued member of the ACSOM team. And he did say, because obviously he's from a media background, and that is a job and an employment route that Declan, yourself, you're taking into journalism and media. And he was speaking about how everybody thinks that, they always shout about engagement and, I would say this and I would say that. But the minute you give sometimes people a platform to actually air their views or ask the question, they fall silent. So it's very important to get the right people to represent the fans, so that when it comes down to the crunch, when they get that moment, that opportunity to put across the fan views, they are capable and able to do it. So on that note, actually, and you've got to be as fair and balanced as possible, we've heard that that Dominic McKay has been contacting Celtic supporters. We heard it, live on ACSOM 2 or 3 Mondays ago, that he phoned a specific Celtic fan at home and was on the phone for 10 minutes having a chat with him. So there's engagement ongoing. It might just be that a lot of the people who are being engaged with aren't shouting from the rooftops. In relation to ourselves as a podcast, as a broadcast, a Celtic State of Mind have been trying for a long time to engage with the club in various different ways. Declan. I probably explained them to yourself over the piece. Press access was something that we have tried to get. We've also tried to speak to certain members of the club, certain directors of the club, and so that we could put it out to the wider fan base. Because although, JP, what you're saying there is correct about going out to thousands, the reason I sometimes mention that is that obviously in relation to progressing ACSOM and getting in proper sponsors to the channel to allow us to develop it and grow it and get more people on board, I need to look at all the figures. I need to look at these things. So although we'll never chase a clickbait headline to get an audience in, it is important that people are tuning in, and I think that shows itself a kind of small microcosm of the Celtic support. It's a community in itself. But one thing the club have done, because you've got to be balanced, is they have started allowing us to attend certain press conferences that they put forward. Now, although we have, through a State of Mind, access to clubs including Hibs and Livingston, so we have the same kind of access as like Sky Sports, STV, BBC, etc. When it comes to Celtic, we are often given the kind of individual events that they set up just for fan or alternative media, and that's great because it's better than the nothing that we were getting before. But next week, here's the thing. Next week we have been invited into a press conference with Scott Brown. Right, the departing captain, Scott Brown, and Natasha will be representing a Celtic State of Mind at that press conference. But it goes back to the point I made before. We're going on about fan representation and what would you say and what would you ask. Have a wee think about that. So if I was to say to you, Dec, right, you're sitting in for ACSOM next week, you're speaking to Scott Brown, what would you ask him?
I'd probably ask him, leaving Celtic now, does he feel that there's a regret in leaving at this point in time with what's happened? Would he have liked to have left on a high, inevitably? Does he ever see a future for himself back at the club? Does he still think he's got a lot of time left in his legs? Remember, I've got a wee bit of experience with the old pressers. I mean, my new pal Jack Ross, so I became an old hand at them. But I think that'd be quite an interesting one. I'll probably tune into that because it'd be quite here. And again, you'll get different questions asked to Scott, again, from fans' views, because even though I want to do journalism and whatnot, some of these questions that you watch and listen to from the old traditional journalists are the same questions. They're boring.
Generic.
They're generic. It's the same rubbish. Oh, there's blah, blah, blah. You're looking forward to this and you've had a good season and blah, blah. And it's like, change it up a bit. So I think alternative fans media, being able to talk to figures like Scott Brown and whatnot is very good, and you can get different questions. We've seen that even this season when we were given a bit of access to the pressers with John Kennedy, that you can ask different questions. But that's what I would ask Scott Brown about, probably the element of regret this season, and if he saw maybe himself coming back to the club in a future role.
Interesting. What about yourself, JP? Any burning questions you would ask Bruni?
Why did you kick out a Neymar in the Champions League game? No. As much as I love him, oh man, I still wish he had that, because I think we would have beaten him again that night. I really do.
That was frustrating. Frustrating. Yep.
But no, I'd probably ask him if he really. I'd probably ask him what his highlight in the Champions League game would be, because obviously he's played in loads, not many recently, unfortunately, but he's played in loads of them. I'd ask him what his highlight is in that, in terms of the calibre of players that he was going up against. Because, I mean, if you look at his roll call of the fields he's gone up against over the last 13 years, I mean, he's definitely gone up against some of the best players that have ever graced a football pitch.
Yeah.
Xavi, Iniesta, I mean that's off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure there's way more. I bet you it's amazing. So I'd ask him that, and I'd also ask him if his thoughts on the Dubai trip. And I know he wouldn't give me an honest answer, but I'd be like, did you want to go? Did you when you were told you want to go to Dubai? Did you want, as a captain? Did you think it was a good idea? That would be a very, very interesting one, because if it was shaped in such a way, it's a difficult question for him, isn't it? Because he's still represent, Of course. Yeah, I understand. It's not, if I was given the opportunity, I don't think I'd ask that question, because I probably wouldn't be allowed to ask that question. and he wouldn't be able to give me an honest answer. He'd probably be like, next.
This is a good one. I'm glad you brought it up, JP, because it actually gives you the difference between, as Declan was talking there, the mainstream side of things against alternative media. So, for example, if you were working for one of the mainstream channels or newspapers, you'd probably be told to ask that question. You'd be told, go in and ask that question, and if you don't, then you're going to be questioned. So that is agenda driven, isn't it? And that has always been the issue. So you'd be going in there with this agenda that some other guy above you or girl is telling you to go in and ask that question. When it comes to us as an alternative Celtic channel, Natasha goes in there and asks our question in any way, shape or form she decides. So I think it's the agenda against the non-agenda kind of driven view on it. I would be interested, because I think that we're in an era where statues of Celtic players have been going up, and they're up for the right people. Jimmy Johnstone, and you've got Brother Walfred, Jock Stein, Billy McNeill, and then there's plans to have another one of Billy McNeill. There's another one in Uddingston of Jimmy Johnstone, Bobby Lennox, that's right, Salt Coates, and I think these are great, and I actually think that there should be one for every single Lisbon line, in their place where they were either residing or where they were born, a place associated to the player. Personally, that's what I feel. But the big thing about Hillabeath, where Scott Brown comes from, is that there's one of Jim Baxter. So when you're driving into Hillabeath, which is a tiny wee village in Fife, and you're driving in, there's this beautiful bronze statue of Jim Baxter on the left-hand side. And he's nonchalantly kind of looking down on you as he's moving with the ball. And you just think, well, it would be nice on the other side of the road to have the Bruni, a statue of the Bruni, just standing like that. So I think these things cost about 70 or 80 grand, so we might start the fundraising for that. But I don't think Scott Brown would buy into it. So, on the one hand, we're talking about a lack of engagement. On the other, credit to the club. They've asked us in for that press conference next week. And Natasha will be representing ACSOM. And I'm looking forward to some of our questions. And I'll pass that one on to our JP that you raised there in relation to that. Because on the subject of Dubai, there was a freedom of information published on the government website last night. Declan, I believe it's now a 404 not found message you get when you click on the link, probably because there's been some issues with the redaction, maybe a data breach, something along the lines. What did you make of it? I think it was a 34-page document. One of the ACSOM team had the foresight to save it, so we do have access to that document. Anything groundbreaking? I believe that it cuts off at a very pivotal moment in the proceedings prior to the decision, obviously, to prevent 13 Celtic players from playing in 2 games.
Yeah, I think redaction first, it's always very, very difficult to actually get through a document and understand it properly, because so much gets taken out, names get taken out, whoever's talking, whatever the issue is, who's involved. So that's always very difficult. But the timing of the date seemed very interesting. That was what we kind of had a quick chat about on air. The communication just seems to cease. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the follow-up of this. But I think I'm still of the opinion, no matter what happens, Celtic shouldn't have went to Dubai, and it was a bad mistake. The club admitted that, Peter admitted that in a video. No matter whether they had been given the thumbs up, in my opinion, it was a silly mistake to make, especially when the club still have staff in furlough but could afford a few £100,000 trip to Dubai that was not needed, and basically killed 2 games for us.
Yeah, we've heard some horrific figures, like even as high as £500,000. Declan, you're reading the document, and as you say, with regards to redactions, and for anyone who has been unfortunate enough to be employed in a position where you've had to do redactions, you will know that it's so easy, because it's human error. It's human error. I mean, you can type into if it's Adobe or whatever you use, a certain word that you want to redact, that's fine, but it doesn't catch them all, and you might give away somebody's identity, not by name, but by position. It's a very difficult and labour-intensive job. But to be fair, that was only 30-odd pages. I was in a job, JP, where my redactions were over 1,000 pages long, and we were doing reports with bundles like that every single week. So it's mind-numbing. But yes,
a lot of coffee and a lot of all-nighters, probably.
A lot of Red Bull, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, these are the things, it brings it back to focus. It's one of these things, as Declan says, we've spoke about it time and time again, the Dubai trip. brings it back into focus. And obviously the post-Dubai press conference with Neil Lennon, and he was talking about hypocrisy, and then there's a suggestion that we were harshly dealt with in relation to the amount of players that couldn't play in those 2 games. What's your feelings on this, JP? Is it time to move on? I mean, because I'm guessing now that someone else will put in another Freedom of Information request for the dates following, the timeline of that particular report.
I mean, the aftermath of Dubai and what it caused us is there for all to see in terms of who we had to play in those games and who we had personnel to play in those games. That can't be changed now. So it's ultimately, I think it's futile if you're, talking about whether goalposts were changed or anything else. It was a fluid situation, wasn't it? It's not as if there was any precedent for this, happening. I don't really think you could sort of start pointing fingers. I certainly wouldn't start pointing fingers and saying, they changed it, they changed this or they changed that because it was Celtic. It's some sort of discrimination against us or the club. I think maybe there was a case that they were just not organised or they weren't on the ball in terms of everything that was going on to do that, but it was a brand new situation for everybody, so I certainly was that point the finger. One thing I would say is why did Celtic place such emphasis on going to Dubai? Why was there such a desire by the manager and the club to go and take all that playing staff over to Dubai? And then you've got to think back to Neil Lennon's outburst after Ferencváros and saying that players didn't want to be there. Was Dubai a genuine last-ditch attempt, or not last-ditch attempt, but an attempt to try and create a bit of harmony, a bit of camaraderie, and did they think that would do that in terms of, it's always great to go away with people that you work with and everything like that. I went on a work trip with DF to Berlin and it was amazing. The whole of our DF group all went to Berlin for a couple of days. That was our Christmas night out, and it did build bonds and it did, create a camaraderie. So was that genuinely there, even despite the fact that it was completely a terrible idea, given the circumstances that they went there in? But was that there? Did that show you the lack of harmony that was there? That became, let's press the button in Dubai. Let's go to Dubai.
The last throw of the dice,
I mean, as it were. Arguably, it might have worked because I still maintain that those games after January, if we did go into those games with a full personnel available, arguably we would have won them. I mean, it's all ifs and buts and maybes, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but you know what I'm saying. I think we could have taken care of those games. That's what I'm saying. And then when they weren't taken care of, everybody just kind of went, "Oh well, that's it, isn't it?" When Nisbet scored that equaliser, probably Lennon sitting at home self-isolating was just like, "Oh well, that's that then."
Talking to Ocoflex in his AirPods, apparently, Declan. Now, when we're looking at, there's a couple of other points to cover here. We've named a couple of players there. Celtic's signing policy, Declan, is something that has been obviously discussed because we're moving into a new regime, a restructure, a rebuild, all of these things. And Colin Watt yesterday was talking about how influential a new man could be coming in and working with what he's got, as well as supplementing that, complementing it with new signings, but really getting the best out of what he's got. And I think Colin was onto something because we've seen it in the past. The example that Colin used was Martin O'Neill coming in and perhaps getting the best out of some players, such as Stan Petrov, for example. I mean, he absolutely bloomed under Martin O'Neill. Some of the other examples that get thrown about, Bobby Petta. See, I'm not so sure on that because I know that he had a few good games, but it's not as though we had 2.5 cracking seasons out of Bobby. I don't think so anyway. I just think that the games were so pivotal, pivotal moments, Ajax in the 6-2 game, but I don't think we've seen that over a period of time from Bobby Petta, and I'm not having a dig at Bobby, but I think the big one for me was someone like Stan Petrov, because he had come in at a bad time for anyone really under John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish. So Colin was talking about getting the best out of 3 or 4 guys who've maybe underperformed this season Also, getting the best out of 3 or 4 of the younger players who are maybe on the cusp of something, just on the edges, the fringes of the squad, and then maybe getting something out of some of the lone guys that are out there playing and playing well elsewhere. And I think he is onto something, because, you know, we had done a previous podcast where, you know, at the top ends we were getting rid of 18 players, which is just astronomical amounts of personnel to be getting rid of in any organisation, never mind a football team. But we started talking about that, and I think he's got a good point on it. And the example I would use, I guess, and I'm not thinking for a moment that we can go out and get a manager of this calibre. What I'm talking about is the impact that he's made. And I know JP will also have a view on this. So Thomas Tuchel, for example, he comes in, he replaces a club legend at Chelsea in January. And at that point, you know, the club are underperforming. Lampard is sacked unceremoniously. They're sitting 8th in the league. They're now 4th. They're in an FA Cup final. They're in a European Cup final against a team that JP is not too fond of. But it's a great example. It's a great example of a club just acting when the time is right and making that change. And then the manager, and as I say, I'm not saying we're going to get anyone of that same calibre, but the manager making that impact, Declan. You know, getting a song out of so many players that weren't doing it for Lampard before. And, you know, it's with a bit of regret that I'm looking at that, because I'm a bit like JP. I still think that at that moment we could have turned it round, but we didn't make the change.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would ever be in a podcast praising Roman Abramovich, but you know, they made the right moves this season. And no doubt, when Tuchel came in, guys like Zuma, Christensen, I'm trying to think who else played at the back for Chelsea. Certainly Zuma and Christensen as defenders. Big Thiago Silva's in there, the old PSG man. He certainly made them a lot more a defensive unit. Even some of the goalkeepers' saves last night were excellent. They were under the cosh for a bit of the game, but they silenced Benzema very well and played very well. Now, Rudiger, I've just seen that in the comments, that early on in the season Chelsea were struggling like ourselves to defend properly. They were having horror shows, and you know, they made the change and it did work. Now, whether it would have worked this season, again, it's all just if buts and maybes, but you can at least try it, and you can at least try and inject something new. That change shouldn't have been John Kennedy at that point, because we've seen that that's just been the same continuation of the old guard since John's had the job. Is it over 60 days now, Paul, he's been there?
It is, yes, it's over 60 days.
So, you know, I mean, between Brendan coming in 60 days, he'd beaten Lincoln Red Imps 3-0 at Celtic Park, very different team, but, you know, had a team in harmony and gelling together. So if we'd have made the change, even at the very last ditch point of Ross County in the League Cup, you know, I don't know what could have happened then, but we didn't, and where we are just now is our own doing.
It is. The architects of our own demise. I don't know what the Latin is for that, JP, but you're going to come in and add something there to what Dick was saying.
It does lead me on to a bit of research that I've done, because on Sunday, after Sunday's game against Rangers, I mentioned something about COVID, and I only managed to shoehorn a little bit in of what I actually was trying to say. In the comments, somebody said, "JP, stop it! You're embarrassing yourself." And I read that, and I was like, "Okay, I'm going to take that point and try and elaborate." So, if you look back at the January to March last year, pre-COVID, January to March, we won 9 games and we drew 1. We scored 34 goals in 10 games. Eddie scored 9, Griffiths scored 7, McGregor scored 6. Julian 3, 2 apiece for Ayer and Cham, and then the goals were spread 1 apiece after that. Man of the matches, the actual game man of the matches, not Celtic man of the matches. Eddie got 3, McGregor got 3, Griffiths got 1, Forrest got 1. Of the players who have left, Forster played all the games, obviously, so he's gone. And Cham played 7 of those 10 games and only didn't play the last 3 probably because of injury. Hayes played 2, Bauer played 1, Frimpong 1, and Jozo played most of them because we were playing 3 at the back. Yeah. So all those players were playing for something. What were they playing for? I would argue they were playing for a move. And I include McGregor in that. And I include Edouard in that. And I include Ayer in that as well. And those guys were flying. We scored 34 goals in 10 games. Everybody knows what the next game was that didn't happen, right? The season was curtailed. So I would argue that without COVID, those players, this big, massive rebuild that has to happen this summer, I don't think would be as big, because I think some of those players would have moved last summer. We wouldn't have liked it. It wouldn't have gone down well ahead of this monumental season. But I think some of those players would have gone, and I think we would have had to go out and sign players to replace them. We'd have surely had to spend serious money to get them. And I just think you would have been left with a squad starting this season that had a far bigger appetite for success, because there might have been players there that hadn't won anything. These players have all won everything for the last 4 years. And you've got a different mentality going into Champions League qualifiers, and you don't have Neil Lennon coming out at the end. Foolishly, in my eyes, I'm not defending him. He shouldn't have come out and revealed what he did about the players not wanting to be there and how they'd come to him and said they didn't want to be there. So you're utilising a squad with that. And that's before you talk about Bolingoli. That's before you talk about Dubai and the self-isolation. That's before you talk about the international games where Christie has to self-isolate, Eddie gets COVID, all of that. And that's even before you get to the fans, because everyone automatically thinks, oh, you're just saying, oh, because we didn't have fans. That's way down my list of priorities when I'm talking about the impact of COVID on Celtic. Celtic were fragile going into COVID. They didn't anticipate it. And I think the board probably thought they could have got away with it without COVID, and they might just have. And it's a gamble they should never have made, in my opinion. But they were in a fragile state. Rangers sailed through a storm, and we capsized in August. And that's what I want to say about that. So.
No, JP, what you have realised, if you haven't realised already, is that every single word you say will be scrutinised, criticised, and that's what happened, because you made a point but didn't really have the opportunity to expand on the point which you just did there. And I'm looking at the situation thinking, well, actually, when you add all that up, it's great to do so with hindsight, of course it is. And you look at the comments that Neil Lennon made, two comments that are very relevant to what you said. Firstly, there's guys in there who don't want to be here and haven't wanted to be here for some time, and it's starting to bug me, was these words. The other thing that he said in and around that situation in relation to the fact that the guys didn't want to be there were that, and this was bizarre, maybe they are sick of winning. Remember that one? So when you look at it from that kind of angle, Declan, I think it's a good point you raise, JP. It's just so unfortunate that we're sitting here in May looking back, and it is what ifs. But I think that the club would have approached the transfers in a completely different way had we brought in all the tens of millions for the players described. And, had you sold Ncham back then, you would have got a good fee. Edouard was playing at his optimum in terms of the fee. You would have been able to get Christie, Ayer, and maybe some more. So you're right, you're talking big money coming in. The rebuild would have been vast, but it would have been a completely different story. But this does take us on to what is the rebuild going to look like. So first and foremost, I take Colin's point on board. Bring in a manager of quality, and I think I'm still looking for Eddie Howe to be that man. I've got to say, I'm not looking elsewhere. I know Celtic have been offered Paulo Fonseca, and I think any other club who's managerless in a reasonably big club or in a big league will be offered the manager as well. Obviously that's going to happen through agents, but I'm still pinning my hopes on Eddie Howe. So if he comes in, Declan, and he has that same effect that O'Neill had on the likes of Petrov, and we could probably go through the effect that Rodgers had on various players, then that's going to improve what we have. But then when we look at the actual transfer side of things, a couple of things working against us and many other teams. Firstly, there's a financial aspect of getting out of COVID and recovering out of COVID. And then obviously there's the Brexit aspect of, bringing players in willy-nilly from all over Europe isn't going to be as easy when you're looking at work permits, etc. And there was an interesting discussion activated last night, which I wasn't really part of because I was finishing season 3 of Ashes to Ashes. That shows you how long it takes me to catch up with things, JP, right? I kind of sussed it out, but it was good for it to confirm what I had been thinking. But you look at the way that we've been signing players. Yes, it has worked a number of times when you bring someone in for £2 to £3 million, and you sell them on as a profit. We all know what that was the kind of the blueprint for success for Peter Lawwell making money for the club. Russell makes a great point that why not just qualify for the group stages of the Champions League rather than sell the players and make just as much money, which I do subscribe to. But then I was looking at influential players that we've had who are all Scottish players, most of whom were signed from Scottish teams over the last few years. So you look at Scott Brown. I'm not going to tell you where we signed him from, but because you'll know. David Turnbull. Craig Gordon's last club was Sunderland, but he's a Scottish player, largely based in Scotland. Ryan Christie, Stuart Armstrong, Lee Griffiths. Again, we signed him from Wolves, but he was available to us when he was at Hibs and when he was at Livingston Dundee, when he was a prolific goal scorer. Greg Taylor from Kilmarnock. You then look at some of the most influential players that we ourselves have produced. Scottish players, James Forrest, Callum McGregor, Kieran Tierney. And you look at some of the players that we missed out on. John McGinn, Aaron Hickey, Stephen Fletcher, James McCarthy. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, by the way, I can't see a centre-half in that entire group or even a goal scorer. But you get my point. Over the last 10 years or so, you imagine a team built around that as a nucleus. Now, they'd have won the league, and they would have probably performed a lot better in Europe than some of the teams that we've put into European competition. The reason I'm bringing it up is that there's certain names getting linked to Celtic at the moment. Lewis Ferguson, Doig at Hibs, Campbell at Motherwell, Jamie McGrath at St Mirren. These are guys that people are sometimes turning their nose up at. And that's not the class of player we need at Celtic. We need to think bigger than that to be a success at Celtic. And I'm not too sure now, Declan, I'll come to you first, that that's the case at this moment in time. I think the shining example of that at the moment is Turnbull. The season before that was probably Ryan Christie. Going back a few more seasons, and it's Stuart Armstrong. And these are guys we brought in from Scottish football players. And I think with everything else that's happening with the COVID and Brexit, players like Ferguson, I think, would be good additions to this squad. Colin disagrees with me, and that's fine. But, I think if we supplement the team with the odd player from overseas that we think can come in and play our system, that's great. But I think we need to go the other way, during this transitional period. And we do need to look closer at home. What's your thoughts on that, Dick?
Well, I think it's always been something Celtics did. Not to compare the two teams and the two generations, but even under Jock Stein, adding guys like Dixie Deans, Harry Hood, Stevie Murray into the squad that was already developed has always been something that Celtics did. If you go to the centenary year, we bring up a Scottish striker, and he's arguably the guy that wins us the league that year. Obviously, sign him from West Ham. But on that point, I think, just because they're Scottish, we just undervalue them. We just think to ourselves, Lewis Ferguson. I think Lewis would be a good signing for Celtic, but some people would rather us buy a £4 million player from Manchester City's academy because he's French or something, which doesn't make sense to me. I think Lewis, he's still young. He's still got a bit in him to develop. Same goes for Doig Hibbs. So why turn your nose up at players like this? And Ryan Christie is an example of a player. He's been poor this season, but what you were saying earlier, Paul, last summer, you've made an absolute killing in Ryan Christie financially. And the same goes for a few of the other players if you'd have punted them at their prime. I don't doubt that if David Turnbull has another few strong seasons at Celtic, the £3 million that you paid for him, you'll make money on. So, I've got absolutely no problem with us buying Scottish players. And I don't think that Lewis Ferguson or Josh Doig would be bad signings for Celtic. I think they would add something to the squad. And I think they would, be good enough to be in the first team because they've still got a bit of development to go. And there's nothing wrong with buying Scottish players. It's something we've always did and something we should continue to do.
The thing is, JP, I'm not saying for a moment that it's a fail-safe. Nothing ever is. I mean, Gary Mackay-Steven, I thought he'd have been a success at Celtic, and he flopped. And there's other Scottish players that have come in. Scott Allen came in fairly recently. Lewis Morgan came in. It didn't work out for him, and I thought Allen was a fantastic player at Hibs when we signed him. So, what's your view on this? I mean, it can be a bit kind of snobby of fans, I guess, and I'm probably falling into that category. You look at marquee signings, as Declan says, just because he's got a sexy name and a sexy background, and we sign him from the PSG academy, he's a better bet than somebody who's actually in the league that you are participating in and doing well in that league. Do you think that some through design, but some through necessity, we will see a lot more of an influx of kind of Scottish players coming into Celtic this pre-season?
I wouldn't have an issue with it. I think there's probably got to be a balance. I think we definitely need to bring in experience. I don't think we should be going all out and signing just like loads of young guns, Scottish young guns. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, if there was to be a ready-made captain brought in, you'd like to think it would be somebody with a bit of gravitas, and if it was a guy that was in his late 20s, early 30s or whatever, but was of some renown, be it whatever nationality, that would be something I would be hoping for. But with regards to signing players like that, you want players that are, as Russell said this before, you want players that are aware that they are playing for a big club and are not overawed by it, but they embrace it and they go for it. And if you ask them to run through a wall, they'll ask you for another wall to run through after it. That's the type of people that you want, and really appreciate it. I mean, I listened to John McGinn talking about winning the Scottish Cup with Hibs, and it's so unfortunate that we didn't get that guy, because I just like the way he talks, and that's before you even get to his feet and what he does in a football park. You know what I mean? Just the way he talks. And on that note, I did like Jack Hendry taking strips off that guy in the dressing room, calling him a space cadet. That was pretty good. And by the way, I never jumped on the battering Jack Hendry bus. I actually said on a Melly at the Match 20 Minute Tim's podcast, I was with Melly at a game and we were talking about Jack Hendry after the game, and Jack Hendry's pilloried for a run of games which Celtic lost. Celtic lost 3 games in a row and Jack Hendry played all those games. And I think because he's associated with those losses, subliminally Celtic fans just completely wrote him off. And then there's the video of him running about at halfway line with the ball. I think it was at Partick Thistle, where he doesn't really cover himself in glory. But I don't think Jack Hendry is by any means, as he's obviously proven in Belgium, is by any means a dud. I really don't. I might be made foolish to look foolish for saying that, but I never did. I always kind of thought there's got to be something there,
The thing with that one is, as well, JP, going back to what Colin was saying, if we are able to pull a couple of these guys back from loan who have gone out and performed, I think Hendry's the classic example. I don't think Luke O'Connell's ready to come back. I think another season out on loan would do him wonders, either at Queen's Park or maybe at a higher level. And there's a couple of other guys like that, but I think maybe Sved might come back. I don't know, but we've got to make a decision on him pretty soon. And again, this is all opinion based, because I'm not scouting these players. I'm not seeing them. I'm just seeing the snippets that everyone else is seeing. If Bayo scores a goal here or there on the second tier of French football. But it does take me back to the Jack Hendry signing and talking to the scout who scouted him, and the reports that he was giving back to Brendan Rodgers about Jack Hendry. And this is a quote, by the way, using one of Declan's wee legal words there, verbatim. This is a verbatim quote. He said he was returning performances like Beckenbauer. And I just thought, wow, that's tremendous. So I now call him Jackenbauer, right? So maybe next season we'll see some of that. And at that time, I'm thinking, really? Beckenbauer? Wow, because he was probably going through that kind of run of games where he wasn't really showing. But interestingly enough, again, just coming to my mind here, talking to the scout, and I won't get him into trouble, but he was talking about the change in approach of Brendan Rodgers when it came to the week. I think it was a weekly meeting that they had with Brendan Rodgers. And Brendan Rodgers, obviously there was loads and loads of players who are being scouted, always is being scouted by Celtic, and all the scouts would feed back the reports on X, Y and Z, and he was engaging with just about every single player that was getting put on his table, and he was asking questions, he was interested. But there was a distinct change. There was a moment where that all changed, and whatever was being reported back, Rodgers was not interested. He had checked out because he knew he was never going to get the budget for the players that he wanted. So no matter who was being presented to him, and I think it's all around the Castagne and others deals that didn't go through. And McGinn, of course, we've mentioned McGinn, he had checked out, and he knew that a lot of the players that were being presented to him were never going to be the standard that he wanted at Celtic. But his attitude and his approach, actually changed, and the scout who I was talking to actually commented on how bad a change it was, how noticeable a change it was. He wasn't interested in what was being presented to him by that stage. So that's interesting. But by that time, we had bought Jack Hendry, and he definitely was a Brendan Rodgers player. You know how we talk about the players that he didn't sign, Marvin Compere and Marian Shved and others. Well, Hendry was definitely a guy who Rodgers rated very highly.
I think there was a line in the sand where that moment happened, and it just like the line in the sand was drawn, and then after that moment, it became a point where Celtic were just signing whoever they wanted, and it didn't really have Rodgers' input.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
That's mental. That's mental.
I know. I think what happens is that obviously Brendan Rodgers gets a hard time from a lot of Celtic fans because he didn't cover himself in glory the way that he left, and a lot of people I've spoken to say that he didn't even get in touch with them who were at the club, people who were employed by the club. So he's never ever going to change that because that's what happened. But I think the circumstances at some point will come out. I'm just not sure that Brendan Rodgers will talk about it because he's always very respectful when he talks about Celtic. And he always has been since he left. But with these things, somebody will write a book, somebody will contribute to a book, someone will speak on a podcast in the future when they're no longer part of the actual club, and the truth will come out. But I think there was a lot of things, JP, we've heard a lot of the reasons why the relationship between Brendan Rodgers and Peter Lawwell was strained and then broke down. But yeah, there was a very visible day where they've gone in and gone about their business the same way as they always had done, with scouting reports and feeding back, not interested. Didn't even engage in relation to, is this a guy that we can improve our squad with? So that was interesting for me. But Jack Hendry, who knows, he might come back. But we're talking about Scottish young guns. That was a good term that JP used about some of the players that we've been linked to. And I always say this when we're talking about Celtic Colts teams. Jock Stein wanted this to happen in 1968, Declan. He made the application for Celtic to have a B team in the Scottish League. It was a second division at that time. Was it called the Division B, maybe by that spot? There was only 2 leagues. And the Scottish second division would have housed a Celtic reserve team. And Jock Stein tried to sell this. He tried to sell it to the clubs. He tried to sell it to the association. And what actually happened was it was Partick Thistle that had the defining vote, and they voted against it, because they didn't want people who might have gone to Partick Thistle games to go to a Celtic reserve game when Celtic weren't playing at home. All these years later, there is a deal firmly on the table, and we're looking to put a Colts team, Declan, into the Lowland League system. Now, they are proposing that it's a 1-season trial. It will not affect promotion or relegation in any way, shape or form. They're looking at players who are going to be under, I think, 20 years of age, 22 players of a squad. And they're looking at this situation, I think the clubs are looking at the situation in the respect that there's not a lot of money down there in those leagues. There's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of sponsorship. There's certainly not a lot of broadcasting. You only see these teams if they make it into the Scottish Cup first round proper, really. And they're looking at the money. There is a cash incentive for Celtic and Rangers to have a team in the league. And, it will ultimately come down to a members' vote. Declan, talk us through the pros and cons of this happening for next season, and also consider, is this Celtic maintaining a Scottish presence for when we leave the league?
That's a question for probably another day, that one. But pros and cons to me, certainly pros is players getting football, especially in the last year. Younger players haven't had as much football. The other pros to it is, again, the actual league and what that could bring in if we do start to get fans, any type of fans back in stadiums. Ticket money and whatnot could just help a few clubs. I think whenever Celtic or Rangers will play, there will be a support that will go and watch them, no matter where it is in the country. So it's another pro in my opinion. It might bring a wee bit more attention to the leagues in terms of sponsorships and whatnot, because you've got a Celtic and Rangers development side in there. The cons, people would maybe argue about the level of the league. We saw how well Luca Connells did going down to League 2 and playing for Queen's Park. Probably be an argument a lot of Celtic fans would make that they would rather guys like Kim and like Ryan Mullins at Queen's Park 2 would rather they would go to a team of that level and play their football, because they'll maybe go down there and get booted about the place. But football has obviously changed. A lot of people would say, Jock Stein used to send a lot of players out to junior side, and that's where they would learn their trade. Another con is it only being 1 year and it not lasting as long. But I think if you weigh it up, it's certainly something I would rather we had than didn't have, because if they're not going to get the option to play anywhere else and not going to get those games why not? Give it a bash and see how it goes. So I'm right up for it, and I think it would be a positive.
Yeah, I'm the same as yourself. I do really support the idea. We've spoken about it a fair bit, JP, on a Celtic State of Mind. What do you feel about the level? I think it's a fair point that Declan raises, and I think Jim Moore is of the same view, that the level's maybe not high enough to develop the players. My counter to that is they're playing games, and at the moment they're not really playing games, so it's a better level than they're playing at the moment.
Yeah, I think to nitpick over the standard is maybe being a bit fussy about it, because ultimately, like you say, it's games, and it's not just training, and it's not, not having any. I think a lot of it's probably got to do with like bonding and interaction and just having like a camaraderie. Like if you're not playing games, regardless of the level, you're not going to have that. And it's all about creating relationships between different players on the pitch. Like what if there's like a right back and a right midfielder that have got a good understanding that plays for a whole season, and then you could transfer that into the first team. I know that's quite a fanciful thought, obviously, to have two players of on the same side, coming into the first team, but it's a possibility. When is it going to happen? It's not from next season, is it?
Yeah, that's the proposal for next season.
Oh, right. Jeez, I didn't realise it was as quick as that. So potentially, us three could go and watch a Celtic Colts team in the Lowland League before getting back to Celtic Park. Because
that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's a possibility, because we don't know what's going to happen in terms of numbers for the stadium. I know, obviously, the Euros and 12,000 at Hampden and all the rest of it, but a full house at Celtic Park, to me, is still some way away. So let's start looking into, I don't know, buses to wherever. I don't even know I'm ignorant. I don't even know who plays in the Lowland League, so apologies for that.
No, that's again straight away, JP. I think you made a good point by saying that, because I'm now looking at the Lowland League. Is that something I would have done ordinarily, if Celtic weren't involved? Probably not.
I will now, definitely. If you told me next weekend I could go and watch a Lowland League game, and I know it's obviously not happened yet, but if you told me I could go and watch a Celtic team play in a game and be socially distanced at a wee ground somewhere. Like if it was the same as like Lochmarn Park and Maryhill along the road or whatever, you can go and watch a game. I'd 100% go and watch that.
Well, it could be.
I'm not able to watch a football match in real life for over a year.
I know. You could be watching East Stirlingshire at Falkirk Stadium, which has a capacity just under 8,000, or you could be watching Cumbernauld Colts at Broadwood Stadium, which has a capacity of just over 8,000. So, new experiences, possibly, for next season, JP. A couple of comments before we wrap up. Now, Moravchik comes in to say, by the way, Kalmak can put his foot in where it hurts as well. Yep, he has been penalised, unfortunately, a few times this season. Gary Byron, get rid of the lot. New team, new manager, get the support excited. It's going to take 3 windows to get it right away. And I just think that, We've had that podcast where we spoke about bringing in 12 players and all that. That in itself has issues, hasn't it? I mean, when you think about bonding, which you've just mentioned, JP, to try and bond a team together when there's so many new faces is a difficulty in itself. So these, for me, are some of the things that we need to consider. And also, is the finance going to be there? Because if we sell some of these big name players, guys with who are assets, who have a value, it's not necessarily going to then be reinvested in the playing staff because of the COVID issues that we've spoken about. We have got someone just correcting me there. Yeah, View Park, not Uddingston. Thank you very much, Kevin Goldie. I did visit that last. I visited it last year, I think it was. And you know how you get, if you do a video and you post it on Twitter, it automatically tells you your location. And it said the location was Uddingston, even though I'm standing there and I know where I am. And the amount of people that came on Twitter saying, Paul, you've got that wrong. But it was the automatic location finder that was on Twitter.
Yeah.
That's it. So thanks very much for that. And I would actually advise anybody who is in the area to go up to View Park, and because it's a nice wee garden area where the Jimmy Johnston statue is situated as well. But more statues the better for me. And as I say, we've not started raising funds yet for the Bruni to go across the road from Jim Baxter. But you know what? We might revisit that idea in the future. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. channel. We're going to have some prize giveaways very soon as well if you subscribe, just to get you on the channel and get you involved. If you want to take part in the dial-in, which happens on a Wednesday afternoon, get in touch. The emails have started coming through. It's pauljohndykes@gmail.com. I know that a lot of our competitors, fans of our competition, listen into this, so, I don't think it would be a good idea for you to appear on it. But that's my email address for the Celtic fans who want to have a say in the running of the club, who want to have a say in the rebuilding of the club. Get involved. It was a great show yesterday as a trial run, and we will get as many of you involved as possible. All that's left for me to say is Declan McConville JP Mason, thank you again.